Hello, and welcome to Roll Call Part 4 Supports. This is the last of the 3 core roll videos and represents the third point on the triangle I talked about in the very first video. Supports in Kingdom Death are the least essential of the 3 classes. You don't have to play with a support. I will discuss the benefits of doing so, but know that compared to damage dealers and tanks, supports are very much far down the line in how important they are. That said, what is a support? Well, in traditional games, role-playing games, MMOs, dungeon crawlers, whatever else, supports provide a variety of different utility abilities, such as crowd control, healing, debuffing, buffing, and so on and so forth. They tend to not be involved in the front line. They're not seeking to deal damage as such to the boss or to the monsters. They're kind of providing more utility. Now, pure supports, they're not super common, but you will find them. Generally, most supports all have some capability for offense. We'll look at and discuss the Kingdom Death pure support for definite, and we'll look at also a little bit of hybridization, usually towards damage. Although strictly speaking, you can hybridize a support tank if you want to, especially in the early game. Later on, when you have a shield, it becomes a little action intensive, so sort of things to think about. Well, within Kingdom Death, what are the differences? What is a support? So, first of all, like tanks being the green colour and damage dealers being the red colour, as in affinity colours, supports are the blue survivor. They're blue often links into luck as well. It also has fairly strong connotations within the context of mind, and it is, as such, you'll find blue affinities more commonly on abilities that have this kind of mind and support sort of slant to their construction. So, the first thing in Kingdom Death is healing's not super common. One of the things that makes the game so intense and so exciting and engaging is every single point of damage that is dealt usually sticks. It doesn't get healed back up. There's a constant progression towards a final ending with survivors, the monster getting more and more injured, the monster becoming more and more predictable as it runs out of AI cards, the survivors getting closer and closer to death, struggling with their maybe injuries they've suffered, some maybe temporary for the showdown, some permanent. Healing is not super common. That isn't to say it doesn't exist. You can get healing for armor points. There's quite a bit of healing for insanity, which is armor points for the brain, basically. And a big one is bleed. Bleed healing is pretty prevalent and pretty common, and just about every hunt party needs to have a plan for handling bleed tokens, because while not every monster focuses around dishing out bleed, every monster can cause bleed, and sometimes you can even get 2 bleed tokens from a single severe injury. So managing bleed is something that generally needs to happen, and often it goes to the support, or the support will delegate it to a damage dealer. For example, here in our little picture we can see Urza, who's representing our support here, is a very long distance away from the actual fight, which is over here with Zachary tanking, and there's Lucy and Alistair dealing damage. Bleed removal there would be very difficult because of the distances involved, because I've demonstrated a pure support. So that is something to think about. We'll discuss bleed in a lot more details. The other things that supports do in this game is they handle terrain interactions. They're like the primary on terrain. One of the reasons for that is certain items, certain armor sets can provide bonuses to manipulating terrain, and you don't necessarily want to have that on. You definitely don't want your tank. You probably don't want them on your damage dealers. So it often falls to the support to run about the map, scurrying around and dealing with all of the different terrain that just requires one person to successfully interact with them. And you definitely want to interact with all the terrain you can. There's a lot of valuable things you can pick up. Sometimes just getting the right terrain early in a campaign and rolling well on it can change the trajectory of an entire survivor, just by giving them a great weapon, or it can provide a bunch of resources. Vermin patches, for example, are great because cooking is a very powerful thing that you need vermin for. The next thing, it's kind of related because these items often perform the same role, and that's hunt mitigation. In the damage video, I talked about how damage dealers should try to have one slot for some kind of hunt mitigation to help out, but the vast majority of the items, gear cards and similar, are going to be on you. And we'll take a look at those in the hunt phase section a little bit further down the line. But the hunt phase is Kingdom Death's dungeon crawl. It's a dungeon crawl condensed down to a single track with a lot of flavour and lore and story, and not a lot of player agency. But you can give yourself some help, some assistances, by setting up in advance for certain things, planning for them, like the old classic of don't take out an entire party of insane survivors if you have protect the young, because if you encounter feet, they'll all die and that's the end of your hunt. It's just like one form of mitigation. So we'll have a look at some of the items that can help you mitigation when we get to the hunt phase in a moment. The last one is the big one, the really big one, and that is deck control. So Kingdom Death doesn't have a live opponent. This isn't a player versus player game. Somebody isn't piloting the monster around and making the decisions for it, unless you play the storyteller mode, which, I'll be honest, is actually quite a lot of fun. It is very enjoyable, even though it's not particularly commonly played, but I would, if you've got 4 friends who want to play, you might want to think about having a whack at being the storyteller, because it's quite enjoyable, especially if you like GMing. But anyway, your opponents they're a set of programmed abilities and choices and decisions. They don't have any agency. Each species has a pool of AI cards broken into 3 different categories, 4 including statuses, and that's what the species as a whole could potentially do, but then that's narrowed down even further by what actually goes into the monster's deck, what order they're in, which is shuffled up and set at the beginning, and that's their program, but also what ones get removed as wounds, what ones get removed actually pass through, I should say, successfully occur, and blast through the first lap of the AI deck. They don't have any agency. They have preset actions, but the big thing that monsters do is they conceal their intentions. This isn't like playing Monster Hunter World, Monster Hunter is a franchise, where the bosses have a whole thing where they'll signal their attack with a noise and an attack animation, and then you maneuver appropriately to get outside of the cone. That's not a thing here. The backs of the cards just show you the monster crest. They don't have additional information on them. That is something that happens in other games. I've been playing Primal a bit recently, and they have an entirely reactive based system, and it gives you information on the back of the cards as to what will trigger the reactions. You can get very familiar with how those monsters behave. That's not the case here. We don't have additional information on the back of the cards at all, but we can get additional information. We can get perfect information, and that's where deck control comes in. 2 decks, tank is lining up against the AI deck, damage dealers are lining up against the hit location deck. As the support, you're dabbling in both. And what you're doing is you're providing information by revealing cards. They get flipped up and become revealed and get to see what they are, and sometimes reordering the cards. This is really strong because if you know what AI card is on top of the deck, you can make a bunch of decisions about how you're handling it. For example, where's it targeting? You can get the right person in the right place to get targeted, which will, give you the best chance of taking as little damage as possible. Or, if it turns out to be a legendary card, you can organise, or very threatening in advance card, something you do not want to see, you can organise with your damage dealers to have them remove that card as a wound, unless it's a legendary monster, in which case, suck it up, Buttercup. On the hit location side, when you reveal hit locations, the damage dealing survivors, the survivors who are going to be attacking, can line up the best possible weapon attacks with each one. Does it have a really beneficial critical wound location? Then maybe your luck-based survivor is going to have a go at that one first. Is the trap on top? Then maybe the lancer's coming in, or somebody is going to be like, okay, I'll suck it up, I'll take the trap punishment and we'll get a refresh. Or even perhaps you yourself will have the ability to reshuffle the deck. All of these things give you information, give you options, give you a lot of very powerful choices. And that control of these two decks is massive. Just this situation here, incredible. Know that the monster's going to ground fighting on its next turn. So, could just let that resolve. We've got ranged weapons, ground fighting isn't a problem, that's going to give us a lot of opportunities to do nice stuff and then we can hit it. Or over here, well, we got the Beast's Temple. Oh, there's a punishing failure reaction, but on a critical wound, we get a persistent injury that can just end the monster's turn 20% of the time. So let's get our luck survivor have a go at this first. This kind of information that is incredibly powerful, and it's the biggest part of value that a support survivor gives. Now, that's one of the reasons why often we have pure support survivors. A pure support spends all of their activations controlling these decks. That means they're not interacting with the hit location deck at all because they're not attacking it. So the hit location deck can't scale against them. The AI deck, that's being directed towards other targets, so it can't interact with them either. So suddenly you've got a whole 25% of your team who is doing stuff that the monster can't interact with, and that reduces the monster's scaling. It isn't able to scale properly against the whole party because you're not generating hit location reactions. You're doing other stuff that really hurts the monster's ability to conceal its intentions and just kneecapping it. In some ways, pure supports are incredibly obscenely powerful, and that is because information is very much power. However, in practical terms, you rarely get a pure support. I do employ one when I play solo. The reason for that is I don't want to be dealing with as much information as I have to think about as possible, and having a survivor who doesn't interact with the hit location deck reduces the amount of randomness that's going to be occurring. So it's really useful for me to then be like, okay, I'm concentrating on these three guys, they're dealing with the attacking, and this one isn't. However, that said, I never run 100% pure supports, and that's because I want my weapon proficiency tick. We'll get into talking about weapons for supports in a while, but my usual plan, if I'm playing solo and I'm running a heavy support character, is for them to start off by getting a tick in their weapon proficiency, and then they get the heck out of there and don't attack. They'll lay low for the rest of the showdown, either using terrain or other ways, like, say, tall grass, of concealing themselves. So that is it. That's kind of the initial concept of the support. It's very powerful. It is also completely optional. This is entirely a playstyle that you don't necessarily need to even bother with. Some people don't like it. They don't like how it can trivialize some of the monsters. That's perfectly understandable. And people might be like, I don't want just somebody on a support. That's not interesting. Everybody wants to get in a bit. So you might mix it up, have other semi-support abilities on damage dealers, but you'd run, say, 3 damage dealers and 1 main tanks. Like a tank, an off-tank, and then maybe a pure damage dealer and then a hybridized damage dealer. In fact, as we'll talk about, one of the most common forms of support is hybridized between damage and support, to the point that it's going to get its own little video. Anyway, let's now get on to our phases and discuss what we want to be doing. So first of all, the hunt phase. Here's a selection of items and even a weapons to think about in order to help you with various portions of the hunt phase. You're not necessarily going to be the only person carrying these. It's absolutely worth having other players carry some. The tank usually doesn't have enough slots because they're typically running 8 slots on everything they're doing, so they've only got 1 left to try and help with affinities. Damage dealers, on the other hand, hopefully they've got room for 1 item. They might even take 2, depending on how beneficial it is. So, first up, we've got the bone sickle and the bone pickaxe. These become available for you once you're in the world of ammonia and leather, and they give you some very useful resource generation. And in the case of the bone sickle, you even get some survival generation. So just having this will give you 1 survival, and you get to choose which space you're putting the herb gathering in. And then you'll also get the herb gathering event, which if we look up here, we can see you can gain fresh acanthus, you can gain vermin resources, fresh acanthus, survival, quite a bit of survival, and even sometimes you can explore the swamp. And this is optional. You don't have to explore the swamp if it's a problem. I'm going to say most of the time, if you've got survival of the fittest, you probably want to explore the swamp, because you don't have to worry about this result killing you. If you're playing Protect the Young, be a little bit more cautious about exploring the swamp, and definitely don't explore the swamp if you've already eaten a fruit from a previous one. That is that's not a good plan. But yeah, this is a very strong, very strong event, and one of the best places for it is to have it after Overwhelming Darkness, because Overwhelming Darkness tends to cut into your survival a fair bit, and this will help replenish that afterwards. The bone pickaxe gives us mineral gathering, and if we just flip up to the mineral gathering page, the primary thing of mineral gathering is gaining access to some iron, but also there's a bunch of other useful things in these tables. And you'll find here with the sickle, we can get bonuses to this one. We can get bonuses to this one if we have a whip. Although I would advise not packing a whip until you've unlocked Crystal Skin. Crystal Skin is phenomenal to have, and because it's passed down the genetic line from parent to offspring all the time, it's like a dominant trait for survivors, you'll want to get it. It's really good. In fact, supports kind of love having Crystal Skin, because you don't have to wear any armor then. You can get your protection naturally. It's a good amount of protection, in fact, and just play it safer with just what you got, and use more slots for other things. Definitely consider having an almanac if you're going to be going into the Iron City, because this is not a great result for insane survivors. But yeah, that's a second form of generation. Within the Sunstalker, you can get the Sun Lure and Hook, which will give you access to sky fishing. I talked about that in the Sunstalker video. The only thing to note is definitely have a sky harpoon with this. Don't just take this out without the sky harpoon. It is a bad time. Dying on the hunt phase is something to avoid as much as you possibly can. This mitigates that from sky fishing, but phenomenal. A few other things. Whips. Whips give you bonuses to a whole bunch of different things on hunts. And the rawhide whip is actually quite cheap to craft once you have ammonia, so this is a nice little option. But you don't need it if one of the damage dealers has chosen to run whips as their primary type, and good for them. I really like whips, they're really enjoyable. The Manhunter has this reverberating lantern. This is basically going to become a staple for your party. The Sonorous Rest gives a load of survival, it can give insanity, it's really fantastic. The Almanac has a bunch of areas where it's useful, different things. Locking you off from disorders is really nice as well, and a little bit of insanity gain when departing is great. Also, it takes a bit of effort to get to craft it, but these are all fantastic. And these are the kind of things you want to be keeping an eye out for, and ensuring people remember they don't get carried away with sticking a ton of like really exciting things on their gear grids. You've got to make them have at least one little bit of their vegetables for getting through the hunt phase. Now, on the Showdown, if you're playing a pure support, your goal is to minimize the threat to yourself and maximize as much value as you can bring. So you're going to be communicating constantly with your tank and with your damage dealers. Initially, you've only got one activation a turn, and you're perhaps looking at 3 different things you'd want to activate for, 4 including attack. You'd be like, okay, well, Rawhide Headband, AI control, Cat Eye Circlet, hit location control, and I've got terrain I need to interact with. So you'll generally be want to talking with your fellow players. This never really changes even once you get access to Surge and you have a good amount of survival, because one of the really strong things you can do is during the first lap of a monster's AI deck, lap is the first pass through the deck, so whenever X amount have been removed and everything's in the discard pile, that's the completion of the first lap. Now on the way there, you can use AI control in 2 different methods. The first one's the standard one, which is at the end of the survivor's turn. You'll just activate, look at these 2 and go, which one are we going to put on top, which one are we going to put in the discard pile? Below it, sorry. Say it right, like this, yeah? Which one's going to get triggered, which one's going to be buried away for a later turn. But you can also actively do it before your damage dealer's turns, and what you're doing then is you're grabbing and you're looking at the 2 cards and you'll be like, okay, which one of these do we not want to see? For example, if we don't have any mood removal, and usually we won't unless we've got a whip survivor, I'll talk about the Whisker Harp a bit later, then we want to get rid of this, so we could put them back in this order and then tell our damage dealer, okay, go for it, cut this off. Like if they deal the wound, this is gone and it's gone over here and we never have to deal with it again. This is a common strategy employed against level 3 monsters because legendary cards are really brutal, and one of the primary plays during the first lap of a deck against a level 3 monster is trying to ensure it doesn't have its legendary cards, unless they're ones that you want to take advantage of, like say Zero Presence from the White Lion. You may want to try and get that onto a survivor, and you'll need a legendary card to trigger that, so that's things to think about. But in essence, this is a very proactive way of behaving. You can effectively be like, I don't want Combo Claw, I'm fine with Claw, I don't want Vicious Claw, we didn't have any bandages, Power Swat, no thank you, Smart Cat, fantastic, let's just have that happen. It archives itself, it's a self wound, like this. You're just kind of like pruning your way through, and then as we get to the second lap, we've now got a monster that behaves in a way that we like. So that's the proactive form. Beyond that, one of the key things to sort of think about is not getting yourself targeted, because you as the support probably have the worst armor out of everyone. You can use terrain to do that. For example, this is an obstacle, so if a monster is targeting via a field of view and you are out of sight behind an obstacle, hey, you're good. Or you could also use tall grass which you can hide in and you're no longer a threat. So stuff like that is fairly useful, but you also can proactively protect yourself by controlling AI as well. If the monster isn't able to target you because there's a target in higher priority, then you're fine. So that's a big thing, but it also lands in this element that I talked about with the damage dealers, which is don't let the monster isolate you. You're at a higher risk of being isolated than most because of you being generally at a longer distance. You're kind of further away and you are way more vulnerable. So not letting the monster be over here on you like this, where the rest of your team is separated away and the monster's between you and the rest of your team, you don't want to have that happen. In those kind of situations, you take your licks and then you just get the heck out of there and try and, you know, get as far away as possible so somebody else can come in and be the closest target. So this is just stuff to think about. And when you're acting in a turn also matters, whether you're being proactive with pruning, or you're helping with the hit location deck to proactively set stuff up like that, or you're going to be reactive and you're going to go just before the tank, who will be going last, in order to make sure the monster targets the right target. There's a lot to think about. Positioning is a really tricky skill. It is very, very hard to teach because every situation is different. There's a ton of squares on this board. There's like so many configurations and variations that, you know, you're not going to even encounter all of them within your lifespan of playing Kingdom Death. It's a massive amount of variety. Same way just about every monster you ever encounter is different from every other monster you've ever encountered, because their decks are randomized and so on, you know. Be safe, communicate, handle the terrain if you can. If you can't, if you're not going to get to a piece of terrain, maybe see if somebody else has the space to be able to handle it. It's better if you can, though, because your activations are worth less than damage dealers and tanks activations. You're smoothing out the difficulties, but tanks are holding the line and stopping the monster winning, and damage dealers are heading towards victory. So their activations are way more important than yours. Right, we're going to go on to the settlement phase. Before we do start that, quick talk about stats. Movement is the only stat I would consider to be really, really good for supports, because you're not often doing things. The rest of them are you know. But if you have, like, maybe gained some good strength, you could flex and be a damage dealing support. Or if you have a bunch of good evasion from leveling up, maybe it's time that survivor became a tank, or you became a support off tank and you just step in and take occasional hits. If you get luck, stop being a support. That character needs to go and deal damage. Luck is just that good. But yeah, for the most part, when it comes to survivors, the greater value you're going to generate is going to be linked to the fighting arts that you get and the gear that you have. So, quick note on the duties of a survivor, of a player in the settlement phase. I like to give each person I'm playing with an area of expertise. Be like, okay, you're in charge of final decisions for this particular area. Tanks, armor, damage dealers, weapons, and support items. Essentially, you will discuss and talk with the others about what we're going to spend our resources on, and you can highlight and bring up the items that will be useful. I like this way of doing it because it reduces headspace for less experienced players. It allows them to feel like less overwhelmed, and also generates collaboration and and reduces quarterbacking. If somebody wants an item, they come to you and say, I want this, and you just be like, okay, well, let's have a look. What's it going to do for you? And etc. So that's just a way I like to handle it, especially playing with newer players. Of course, if you have less players or you're more experienced, it's going to be a different matter. So it's just a suggestion I like. On the innovation front, I also encourage each type of player to look for a few key innovations, because one of the nice areas of friction in the game is when you draw multiple innovations that you're interested in, and having a different voice for each type, each area, each consideration can do a lot to help give player agency. And it's just kind of actually nice and fun to discuss with people and have somebody else who's like, I want this because of this. And then another person is like, yeah, that's great, but I like this one because of this. It's interesting. So to look at these are some innovations that I would generally recommend you consider thinking about and highlighting when they pop up when you're playing and you're like, I'm being the settlement support lead. Song of the Brave. Incredibly good. Removes a negative token on arrival to the showdown board. That's quite nice. But the big thing is being able to always select Path of the Brave unless you're deaf is a a huge amount of survival loss mitigation, and that's very powerful. Additionally, amongst the Song of the Brave Consequences is Saga, and Saga is an innovation that essentially levels up your survivors, improving their baseline that when newborn survivors join the settlement. So that's a nice fun bonus as well. Pottery is great because, hey, you can spend organs to generate love juice. This will help with population stuff, but also it gives you an ability to turn herbs into hide, which can help out. Hide is a very important resource type. It's needed for armor, so fun one to keep your eye out for. Especially love juice, stacking a bunch of love juice and then spending it with Founder's Eye from face painting. Very strong way of helping your population. Cooking, it's great to have somebody keeping an eye on cooking. Cooking is very strong because it generates an endeavor, but the actual recipes, every single survivor type there's a recipe they'd be interested in. So if you learn the cooking and you can push for this, you can help people. You can be like, okay, well, if we use this and this and this, we can give your tank character an extra evasion, or your damage dealer extra strength, etc. Then we have healing innovations. Bloodletting, I put this one first because this has the added benefit of really helping against plague, so you kind of want this one pretty early. But also it cures some disorders. Injuries, sorry. The bed cures a bunch of injuries as well. The Crimson Candy comes from sacrificing a Hunter's Heart, which you'll get from the Manhunter. Has a few more that can be healed. Silk Refining gives you access to Silk Surgery. I'm going to talk about that in detail in its own video. I'm going to give Silk Surgeons either their own video, or they're going to share a video on a bunch of specific, like, these secret fighting arts create their own class. But even without a Silk Surgeon, Silk Surgery is a phenomenal way of fixing problems for survivors. And finally, just wanted to mention the Gorm potions here. Rubedo's not super great. It's really expensive, and essentially most time it gives you courage, but it does have a way of healing somebody who has a ton of negative modifiers. The Elixir of Wholeness here from Citrianus is far more reliable, removes a broken severe injury, love that for it. And then this here, not super common, but it can happen. You're quite often looking for Gorm Brains to help you level up your alchemy potions, your Gormchemy. But sometimes you get to heal a negative attribute modifier, which is nice. So that's just a few things to think about with innovations. Have a look for things that provide healing. We're going to talk about a couple of other healing options, in particular regaining lost limbs. That's quite a significant thing. Losing a leg is really bad for just about every survivor, and losing an arm is super bad for anyone who was training a weapon type that's typically two-handed. Okay, these 5 piles here represent the core sort of things that you're going to be doing as a support survivor. First up, we have AI manipulation. Talked about that in detail, but it's scouting and controlling the AI deck. It's very powerful. We don't have a lot of options. The earliest one we can get is the Rawhide Headband. This tends to still be the best one. In the first generation, there's not much else to choose from. That is changing. I believe that the Frog Dog will have a new piece of AI scouting, and I think it's on an item, which is really cool. But we'll see. I haven't received my Frog Dog yet. I've been waiting for a month and a half now, and I haven't yet had my shipping. The EU's a bit backed up. There's some stuff that's gone a bit wrong. These things happen. The Blue Ring is passively doing this, but the negative is you need to be the monster controller. In true solo, rules as written, you never have a monster controller tile, so technically the Blue Ring doesn't work at all. But even with multiple players and having the monster controller tile, you only have this tile like 25% of the time if there are 4 survivors. So it's not constantly effective. The real switch here, though, is if you have access to the Gloomhammer then you can have a damage dealer with the Gloomhammer who goes before you in the turn order. And what the Gloomhammer does is when it successfully wounds, part of its effects are the person who wounded gains control of the monster controller tile, which means as soon as you start the next turn and the monster's about to have its go, you'll pass the tile across the person to your left, which will be you with the blue ring. So that is a way of constantly having the blue ring working all the time. There is an additional negative with this, which is it actually discards the other card. That means it's going into the deck for the next lap. So it's not as good for pruning undesirable AIs in the way that the Rawhide Headband is. In fact, we don't have anything that compares to the Rawhide Headband for curating a monster's behaviour. This is why you'll often see support survivors wearing Rawhide Headbands until really, really late in the campaign, because we just don't have anything else that does this. And I kind of think that's a shame. I'd like to see an item on a Node 3 monster that replaces the Rawhide Headband. Maybe just does the same thing, but it's an item. So who knows? As it stands, that's our AI control. We have more options in hit location control, not just in different numbers, but also different types. Our poster child is the Cat Eye Circlet. You can get this from the White Lion. It's very, very strong. It reveals the top 3 monster hit locations, puts them back in any order. That means if you have a survivor attacking with a slow weapon and a survivor attacking with a 2-speed weapon, you know exactly what they're going to line up against. Or if you've got 3 survivors all attacking with slow weapons, all sorts of different combinations, it's incredibly strong. Incredibly strong. In fact, it's so strong that I would be content if this thing got nerfed to only look at the top 2 monster hit locations. Because I do actually think the Cat Eye Circlet, it's so strong that it kind of reduces the usable space for later versions of this. But, you know, it's not my game. I didn't design it. I just pilot around in it. Wisdom Potion, this comes from the Gorm. You always have the top card of the hit location deck revealed. Very strong with slow weapons, but useful for any type of monster. This one you would probably ask your luck-based survivor to run it on their gear grid, because they're generally trying to have 2 blue anyway, and this will line up with the lucky charm, no problem. So get it crafted, but ask somebody else to use it and hold it and carry it. Next up, we got the Crest Crown. So this is not scouting or reordering, it gives you a shuffle. This comes from the level 3 Phoenix. Now, a reshuffle is very, very powerful. Essentially, if you combine it with other forms of hit location scouting, then you never have to deal with the trap unless you want to, because every time the trap is present, you can do a reshuffle. And a reshuffle will just jam everything back in, discard pile, etc. It all goes back in and gets reshuffled. So you reduce the chances of drawing the trap. And you also, even if you're not scouting the hit location deck, you can just pop this when you're X amount of way through and reduce the odds of hitting the trap. Apostle Crown is here for completion's sake. I'm going to talk about that in a People of the Sun video, but it is a nice little passive one. It's very strong. Now we have my personal favourite hit location control card. The Trash Crown comes from the Gorm. You can only get it by trying to calcify a mineral piece of gear and failing, which does kill the person who's trying to free it from the mould as well. The Trash Crown is a bit of a weird one. It doesn't have accessory, so I've never been clear where it stands on the rules front. I always just take it that you can't wear a helmet with this, but it isn't armour. It's a bit of an odd one. Yeah. The ability is reveal the next 4 hit location cards and discard 3 that are not traps, and you put the remaining cards on top of the deck in any order. So to break that down, what it means is you look at the top 4 cards. If you found the trap in there, you have to put that back and discard everything else. Otherwise, you pick one of the 4 cards and put it on top of the deck. Now, this hastens hitting the trap in the first place because it speeds through the deck. However, if you have ways of refreshing the hit location deck, like the Crest Crown or the Blue Charm or the or Spear Specialization, both which are used by the Lancer subtype of survivor, you can actually just get refreshes. Now, this isn't better than normal hit location scouting in most cases, but it is stronger when you have a goal in mind for a specific hit location. And for an example of that, if you're fighting the Butcher and you want to death blow it to increase the odds of getting the mask, the Forsaker's Mask, this can help you dig for it. And if you fail, then you can turtle up, hold the line for a turn, and then go again next time because the Butcher's reshuffled. If you're fighting against the Kingsman, it always puts the 3 battle pressure cards on top of the deck. Hey, Trash Crown looks at 4 cards and discards 3 of them. We don't care about battle pressure anymore. We're just gone. My personal favourite, though, is when you're fighting Spidiculus, there's a mechanic called creating a legless ball. And essentially it's where you cut each of the legs off of Spidiculus one at a time. It has 8 hit locations in its deck that represent one of its legs. So 8 cards, 8 legs. Each time you successfully wound one of those locations, it gets removed from the hit location deck and goes into the twitching leg pile. If you achieve that 8 times, you get to roll home a Spidiculus as a ball, and then you can make like the blue ring, and you can get extra, all sorts of really good stuff, extra silk as well. It's a goal, it's a real goal, and it's actually at times difficult to do normally. For example, doing it against the level 1 Spidiculus is super tough because that thing only has, if I remember correctly, 10 wounds. So you need to wound 8 locations of its 10 possible ones. They need to be legs. Tough stuff to do, but with a Trash Crown, you can increase that. And, you combine it with reshuffles from whatever method, or even just sucking it up and hitting the trap. You can be far more targeted. Finally, Necromancer's Eye. This comes from the level 1 Lion God. It is just a better version of the Cat Eye Circlet in every way. It provides armor to the head. It is an accessory. It lets you ignore being blind, even if you're blind in both eyes. Forget it. You got it. You got a new eye to look with. And it looks at 4 hit locations instead of 3. Very, very strong and worth fighting the level 1 Lion God for. On to bleed. Healing, bleed removal. We got 2 items here to consider. Bandages comes from the Skinnery. It's 1 hide. It should be one of your priorities in the early game. Because most survivors die when they get their 5th bleed, you need a way of getting rid of it. And this is especially important in your standard campaign layout because you have the Butcher turning up as your first nemesis, and the Butcher really likes to inflict bleed and even draws 2 AI cards a turn, so sometimes it can just deliver a massive amount of bleed out of nowhere. Against monsters that don't bleed, you can usually be comfortable with 1 or 2 bleed. Against monsters that do a fair amount of bleed, you probably want to clear it entirely at all times. Bandages is very efficient at this because it removes 2 bleeding tokens. However, you do have to be adjacent to the person you're removing the bandages from, and that might not be the playstyle you're following as a support. You might be playing long range with a bow, you might be not attacking at all, sitting quite far back, maybe holding a founding stone to deliver an opportunistic crack if it comes up, but you're not able to get in adjacent to people very easily. So you may ask a damage dealer to use this. The first aid kit comes from the Barber Surgeon. It's a lot more expensive to make. It provides an incredible amount of green affinities. It gives survival on arrival. I always love how that rhymes. Arrival, survival. It's less effective at removing bleeding, but it also removes negative attribute tokens, which is quite a rare thing. This is really useful if you're playing the Squire playstyle. I'll talk about that a bit later. But if you're not, then again, this is something you might want to ask somebody else to have. This, because of all the green affinities, might even be something a tank is interested in. But these are your primary ways. You will find other methods that help control or mitigate bleed, reduce it and similar. The white speaker, white box, has a blood skin there that helps the person, one individual survivor, handle being bled quite in an interesting manner. But it's, you want some bleed control. Removal, I should say, bleed removal. So talk with your team about who's carrying it and where's it going, and adjust your playstyle accordingly. Next we have not being targeted. So we've got a few examples here of how to make things easier by removing yourself from the list of targets that the monster might go after. The fecal salve comes from the organ grinder. Costs virtually nothing, 1 organ to make. Just, make a little pot and fill it up with poop, and then, cover your face in poop, and the monster's going to be too disgusted to go anywhere near you. It has a nice affinity, it gives you when you depart extra survival, and you're not a threat until you attack. If you're not planning to attack, then you're never a threat. That reduces the number of ways the monster can target you. It doesn't make you immune to targeting, but it reduces it. And also, if you get the priority target token, you can remove it, which is really helpful because you probably don't want that token. Just remember, you're not going to get rid of the priority target token if it isn't allowed to be removed in any circumstances. For example, you critted a certain white line right in the ding-dong, then suck it up. Bloom Sphere comes from the Phoenix. It's not as powerful, it works half the time, and there must be a new target for the monster to pick for you to not get picked in the first place, but it is an option. And Cycloid Scale, while mostly being a great damage dealer set, does actually have here a super upgraded version of the fecal salve built into it. So you might be playing with a lot of Sunstalker and have the ability to make a second set of Cycloid Scale, or you might even just say, hey, I want to do a mixed set, can we make me these shoes, because I don't need a set bonus, or I'm just going to live with the really cool set bonus of Clothed and Satiated from the Gambler's Chest. So it's an option. Finally, resource generation. Talked about pickaxes and lures and the sickle already, but some other options are the scavenger kit. This should be a high priority once you have the Barber Surgeon open. It is really good. It gives you a monster resource or a random basic resource, so it gives you some choices and increased chances of getting perfect basic resources or whatever monster source you're particularly after. It doesn't necessarily have to be on you, it could be on somebody else who wants that green affinity. It's phenomenal, and the only negative is it's heavy. Bug Trap only works 80% of the time. It's, again, expensive to make, so it's not something I bother with a lot of the time, but it can really, really help a cooking heavy strategy, especially if you can afford the slot. That's the biggest problem I have with this, is filling it into a slot. One of your 9 precious places that you can put a gear card is a bit of a tall ask for something that doesn't have any affinities and sometimes doesn't do anything, but it's worth bearing in mind. Okay, let's talk about some weapon types that you could possibly use if you're planning to do some weapon progression. First of all, Fist and Tooth. Now, Fist and Tooth, or FAT as I sometimes call it, is something I recommended that the damage dealers keep an eye on, but you could make their life easier by offering to handle it, and then you could be a support who doesn't carry a weapon, you just have a lucky charm, you punch the monster until you get your successful critical wound, and then you scurry off and play it safe for the rest of the showdown. So this is one possibility. If you happen to have a really mega buff, hunky specimen of a survivor who's got like a big strength bonus, you could take them and do this. Very possible. Then we have bows. Bows is going to have its own video. I'm going to talk about them archers, rangers separately. But I wanted to highlight this because one of the most common things, especially in the core game, is to marry together the bow with the support, because both of them like being at a distance. We have a bunch of options. Just want to briefly highlight. Bone Darts is really good. It lasts a lot longer you'd think thanks to that high strength. Catgut Bow and Vespertine Bow are great early game options. Strength and then luck based. Dense Bow and Arrows represents this kind of arrow that helps make your bow just last longer because it puts sharp to, sharp with 6 strength is very good. Clawhead Arrows represents the kind of debuffing that bows can sometimes do, and here's a couple of like late game bows that you can consider if you're doing that. Again, I am going to do right after this one. The next roll call video will be on archers, so we'll talk more about that in detail. Shields, You're probably not doing shield progression. Normally this is the duty of the tank, but maybe the tank is doing grand weapon, so you're going to take a buff high strength survivor and crack around with the shield. But also, once shield specialization is available for everyone because somebody's completed the mastery, you probably want to have a round leather shield or something in your gear grid, because it will provide extra protection. Beacon shield, even better. 3 points to all locations, that helps a lot. I put the Gloom Mehendi in here just to provide another sort of general kind of stuff that it gives. Armor points to all locations is really interesting and good. This even can generate more resources potentially. Whips. Whips do mood control. Whips help on the hunt phase, so whips are great. These are 3 of the best whips to pick up for just taking in general hunt. In fact, the Silk Whip is so good you can legitimately use it as a weapon. It's very, very good. And Rawhide Whip you're probably not going to be using as a weapon if you're a support, because you don't really want to get the priority target token. But these 2, I really like Silk Whip because it archives the mood in play, and it doesn't even draw a hit location, so this is really, really, really good. We have Spears. Going to talk about that in Lancers, but Spears are a very nice option because they have a bit more distance. Here's just the general spear progression for the core game. King Spear to Finger of God to Lantern Glaive. Sometimes you'll see the Lancer Longinus used, but for the most part these 3 are your big hits. I'm going to talk about Lancers in their own video for sure, so we'll stop there. Let us move across now to having a quick look at some stuff that various monsters can offer for support survivors. Right, first up, Flower Knight, and specifically instruments. So, instruments are one of the most engaging and interesting and fun portions of support gear. There's so many unique and I love instruments so much. But of course you have to think about Rule 10, which is if you're on a hunt and you roll a 10, then one of your survivors carrying an instrument, because it's noisy, will die. And that sucks. Some people play with house rules. Certainly, I mean, pouring Tipex over your hunt event 10 is definitely a way to ensure it doesn't happen anymore. Or losing the book down the back of the sofa. There's plenty of options there. But if we are playing strictly rules as written, as intended, we have to live with the fact that the Shia LaBeouf, the harvester, is going to turn up and wreck our day on hunts. And the odds are, during a campaign, you will encounter it once, at least once. Like, that's just the way it goes on the probabilities. So this whole suite of, I don't mean to click on way, this whole suite of really interesting items tends to only be used in fights that don't have a hunt phase. For example, Nemesis fights. The Vespertine Shallow is really sweet just because it gives everyone else extra luck. So this is a nice thing that you could carry as a support and everyone else has more luck for the whole showdown. Really helps deadly farming strategies or just deadly strategies as a whole, but even if people are not trying to use deadly, it's really sweet. It also looks cool. It has its own little sculpt. I love it. Rawhide Drum has a bunch of encouraged synergies on top of giving people extra survival. It's great. Whisker Harp. This is one of these things that I will craft every time I have an opportunity to do so. Removing moods from the Butcher is very powerful. In People of the Stars, this is a game changer if you get it, because the Tyrant is a very moody boy, and he loves a little bit of music to calm him down. And then we have the Gorn. Technically, the Gorn is an instrument without noisy right now, but I've heard that's going to change, which will be a shame. But even if not, this is a way you could bring along an instrument and make use of instrument synergies without worrying about the Harvester until this card gets changed. Okay, we have over here some ways of gaining survival. Replenishing your survival pool during the showdown is very, very useful. Sunspot darts I talked about in detail in the past, but essentially there's a massive amount of survival to be gained from these, although you need to be close. Seasoned monster meat, a lot of survival departing, and a boost of survival here, once per showdown. Death Pact is sort of the king of gaining survival. It has a founding stone built into it, but also at the start of your act you gain +1 survival. That's really, really good. Over here, Raptor Worm collar I wanted to briefly highlight because it provides encourage without spending survival, and also brain damage, which can be useful in some circumstances. Tool belt from the Manhunter. No weapons in your gear grid, you'll get some evasion, that can be quite helpful passively, but also tools with attack profiles gain +1 speed, +3 accuracy and sharp. So if you're not worried about that, you can about gaining weapon proficiency, you can use a tool belt. And if we ever do happen to get tool proficiencies, like, you know, a saw or something, then this could stonks. Pulse Lantern, really, really good. You don't necessarily have to be the person using this. Knocking the monster down once per showdown is very, very strong. If it doesn't have Indomitable, this can create a situation where you knock the monster down and then everybody just smashes it and curb stomps it until it's dead. You know, pile on! Very powerful. The Beetle Bomb, this is a debuff item. This is also the best bomb in the game. I'll talk more about this in the Archer video because Archers do a lot of debuffing, so it's easier to talk about it there, but very good. Hours Ring, not a fan of this item, but do need to mention it. If you're playing as a support, a pure support, you're generally the last person to die. So if you put an Hours Ring on your pure support, you're going to get that redo nicely here. So that's something to consider if you happen to get the Phoenix's Cloaca as a part of your resource drops. Very strong, but messy to play with outside of digital implementations. It's a lot smoother to use this on the simulator because you can take a snapshot and you can wind back to that if required. So a few things to consider there. Now we've just got, if you wanted to play a proper healer type, the Satchel from the Flower Knight gives you the ability to depart with a perishable. Or a resource card, which means you can take a fresh Acanthus out and actually provide healing. We'll have a quick look at it a bit further on, but the Acanthus Doctor can actually wear 3 of these, meaning you can take 3 fresh Acanthus out on every hunt. Fantastic. You'd also stack the Sickle on, and suddenly you can give people heals to 1 hit location, which is very, very, very strong. Okay, I said I'd talk about Squires. Now, Squires are something that has gradually been getting more and more support, but the concept of a Squire is you play a survivor who hangs around next to other survivors and gives them extra value. We have a few items that demonstrate this. The Boss Mahindi gives, as long as the survivors next to you are insane, they'll get an extra speed. That can be very useful. Polishing Lantern, classic. If you activate it, you can give adjacent survivors finesse weapons +4 strength, so you can literally like polish up the survivor's weapon before they attack, sacrificing your activation to make their activation a lot stronger. The Sunspot Lantern is a really classic version of this because you cannot use the Ink Sword unless you're in darkness, and Sunspot Lantern is how you can generate darkness outside of fighting the Sunstalker. So really interesting. We're seeing more and more Squire support gradually coming out across the various expansions. And I've seen it with the Smog Singers, we've seen it with the Black Knight. It is definitely a class that eventually might get its own video if we get enough support. I have the Dagger here because Dagger Masters are also really good as Squires because you need to be adjacent to the attacker, and then you get to spend survival and stab a hit location. Which is really nice because this isn't even an attack. You know, you're not spending activation, you're just spending your survival to keep a little bit more extra damage being dealt with daggers. So a really fun playstyle. Daggers, stuff that works with adjacent survivors, a joy. Fighting arts and secret fighting arts. So to highlight a few fighting arts that are of interest, Thrill Seeker, gain survival, get an additional survival. Amazing with Rawhide, just superb. A Orator of Death, if you're running various sort of encourage synergies. This is nice, but when you die, so but more importantly, you can give everyone some extra mind healing as an array through death. Monster Claw, if you're doing the Fist and Tooth route, here it is. Last Man Standing, this is kind of fun. I'm going to relate a little story where Last Man Standing absolutely was just incredible. So I run this if I have it on my supports. So if I get Last Man Standing, I'll put it on the Support Survivor. And the reason for this is support survivors tend to die last. And they tend to, if you do get in the desperate situation where that survivor is the last one, then having this just really massively boosts their capability to handle the end. Not being knocked down, because no one can encourage you, not getting bleeding tokens. Big, it's big. The monster has to like kill you outright, legitimately, rather than trying to bleed you out. So we played a recent campaign, my partner and I, we played with, we were playing with Ark Survivors, but what happened is managed to get Last Man Standing onto a survivor, we called him Squash, and we were tackling a level 3 Crimson Crocodile, and on the way in, our tank suffered the hunt event that stripped or made her terrified for the whole showdown, meaning she couldn't really do her job of tanking because the Crimson Crocodile has mechanics that like auto kill and massively punish survivors who are terrified. You'll see more if you've played with the Crimson Crocodile, I'm sure you're aware of it, or when the Crimson Crocodile's on the simulator, we'll talk about it more there. Suffice to say, our tank got disabled and the damage dealers had to start taking the hits. It turned out this Crimson Crocodile really loved to punish terrified targets and managed to terrify all 3 of the survivors. And they, one after another, got gobbled up and died. They dealt a ton of damage along the way, but we ended up with Squash on his own up against the Crimson Crocodile. And the Crimson Crocodile was on its last legs. It was like a couple of hits. Squash, because he couldn't take bleeding tokens, got critically wounded after wound after wound. He lost a leg, he got his back broken, he got broken ribs, and like just got shredded apart, but managed to punch that Crimson Crocodile to death and drag its body home. And without Last Man Standing, he wouldn't have made it. He absolutely wouldn't have made it. And it was such a epic moment, and Squash was completely useless after that. He was broken and destroyed, but he managed it. He managed to save and rescue that showdown, and bless Last Man Standing for doing that. Trailblazer, less time on the hunt phase, lovely bonus at the start of Showdown, always great. Burning Focus is amazing. If you spent all your survival, you gain a survival, which just basically means you've got guaranteed survival all the time. And then Vengeance, similar reason to Last Man Standing. You don't really want to be using this. It's not an amazing fighting art, but having it on the support survivor can be very strong because it gives you a boost if things go horribly wrong. You've got that back pocket, like, let's get this done, last man. On the secret fighting arts, Red Fist, it's amazing. I prefer to have it on my support survivor because that way it protects it more, but it's just really good. Anyone having it you're very happy with. Scholar of Death is a lot of fun. It will give rerolls. It's a great deal number of work to achieve it, but I like to have it. I like to do all of the Scholar of Death stuff with my support survivor. Acanthus Doctors and Silk Surgeons we're going to talk about in their own video. So, whoop. And then last of all over here we have Clarity of Darkness. This is like the ultimate support survivor secret fighting art. Basically, when you have it, you gain this Path of Gloom card, and when you're insane, if I just pull this away, you'll turn into the Gloom Man, and you cannot be targeted or have the priority target token. This is frankly game breaking when it comes to monster targeting. They just, unless they have AoE ways of getting at you, they can't. And the whole concept of this is you attack and you lose the gloom. Like, so you attack, your sanity goes to 0 and you're knocked down, and then it would go back to the path of gloom. But if you never attack, you stay in this gloom man status for the whole showdown, and suddenly you're safe. You're completely safe, and that is just incredible. It's just phenomenal. Such a strong secret fighting art, and my favourite support fighting art. Full stop. So, I planned this to be less than an hour, and I have failed. Let's talk about armour sets. Our first armour set is the same armour set for every single class. It's Rawhide armour. It's cheap. It gives us the Rawhide headband. This is one of the only places we can get AI control. It gives us survival when departing. It gives us a ton of extra survival. Each piece of survival has a 50% chance of refunding, and then that 50%, like, it could refund again. It theoretically, if you roll really well, represents unlimited survival. In practical terms, it doesn't. It's more like plus 75%-ish survival. But each time you successfully save survival, the amount of survival you're going to get potentially gets even higher. Really strong, really cheap, hard to say no to, and actually quite hard to stop using. Screaming armor. This is an alternative. It provides terrain activation benefits here. It gives people healing for insanity or extra movement. These are all really good. It also, you have this this screaming coat ability, which provides -1 toughness until end of round. We'll talk about this in full in Lancers, but this is definitely a useful support armor set. You can even go as far as mixed setting it and like just get a little bit of this in here, so you can do that instead. Gets more palatable when you have Ark survivors because of clothes insatiated. But yeah, it's an option. Gorment armor I only have here because it can be a 4-slot armor set, which is really very useful. Allows you to carry more stuff with an additional protection, so it's just something you might want to use if you're going to run it on support. And also the Gorment mask provides massive resistances to intimidate. You can easily put a instrument into here, normally the Gorn, but you see how that like activates up. This could be leather shield as well, boom, get that active. It's really good. But yeah, just mostly because of the number of slots, that's the reason it's interesting. Silk armor. So I love silk armor. It's difficult to make. It's got issues with regards to unlocking and crafting the silk turban. It's gated a little bit too high in the campaign. But if you do make it, a support is an ideal place to put it. And this layout here is the one I'll generally try and use if I'm playing as a support survivor. Silk armor is very difficult to get all of the abilities active on. Generally you have to sacrifice something. In this case I've sacrificed the silk robes ability here. I can put something here to get silk sash active. I can put something here to get the silk boots active. They'll give the extra movement, ability to spend survival for insanity, a little bit of armor point gaining. But the big thing the silk turban has is turn the monster to face away from you, which means the monster will start its turns not looking at you, which is nice. But also it's really helpful to give extra blind spot access for your damage dealers. And it has a lot of durability because you get to move the hit location dice around. So I like to try and highlight as much as I can. This is something to think about. We've got 2 more armor sets. They're over here. I'm just going to pause the video and put them on layouts. Okay, so rolling armor. We get this from the Dung Beetle Knight. The key advantage about rolling armor is each and every piece that makes up its set is an item. They're not armor, and they do not have hit locations. So what this means is we have a way of bringing our Rawhide headband into the late game while also having very good durability and protections. You can also even splash these bits and pieces onto other armor sets in order to get a little bit of extra durability there. But I really like having 2 rolling armor sets. You have one for the tank and one for the support, and the support will do extra tanking duties. And the big thing is, when you start calcifying the tank set, the support can hand its pieces across to the tank and use something else for a little while. So it's a nice little bit of synergy. You also get this here, and you can potentially get this active. You don't really care too much about that. And it has this little emergency panic button with the scarab circlet. This, if you're able to reduce your survival to 0 and keep increasing it, this will trigger over and over and over. It doesn't have a limit, so that's a nice little edge case there. But yeah, rolling armor is a way of getting the rawhide headband and AI control to the late game while also not being made of paper. And cycloid scale armor, I already talked about how the boots are fantastic, but the skirt also gives us a ton of survival for departing. And while these are offensively orientated, if we're playing a Squire style, we could definitely make use of that. And this prismatic lets us stick items on our gear grid and take advantage of having all sorts of different unusual affinity abilities active. Okay, so that is the supports, and here's a little sneak peek of something I'm going to be recording soon to talk about. Yeah, so final wrap up. Supports are the least important of the 3 key classes and baseline classes. You need a tank, you need damage dealers. You can live without supports, but supports provide a lot of value, a lot of utility, and disable part of the monster's scaling and really help nerf monsters. The less experienced you are with a monster, the better and more powerful your scouting abilities are going to be, and as you get more and more familiar, you'll need to rely on these kind of deck scouting manipulation abilities a lot less. When playing a support, think about the items. Be the person who learns the items, who takes charge of crafting the items, and be very communicative. Be very good at talking with your teammates, because you want to be lacing your actions in before theirs in the right moments to ensure they have as much impact as possible. You smooth things out. You don't make the plays, but you help remove all of the wrinkles and creases. In the core game, you can literally get yourself some rawhide armor and wear that for pretty much the whole campaign. Normally you'll take the set that maybe the tank was wearing and hand it across. You might have just a headband, to be honest. I've done that. And I think this is a nice role for experienced players to take. If you've got people who want to deal damage and you've got someone who's happy with tanking, you can just be, okay, I'll play support. I'll make you guys look good and have a fun time by smoothing everything out. I really like how that plays. I also enjoy using a support when playing solo, because it reduces the amount of things I have to think about. Likewise, it's great when playing with 3 players, because we can just have a 4th player be a support, 4th survivor be a support, and we don't have to worry about somebody sitting around not really doing too much. Everybody likes to chuck dice. Throwing dice is fun. So that's it. That's supports. Now going ahead, I've got a list of videos I'm going to be looking at doing. So let's talk about them. Next video is going to be on archers, which is a support and bow based hybrid, mostly focusing around debuffing, dealing damage, and providing some support abilities. I'm then going to look at bruisers, which are off tanks of various different types. So off tanks are hybridize their damage and tanking. Lancers, that is the support, damage dealing, spear, hybrid survivor. And then they may all end up being in the same video because they're not like full strategies by themselves, but I'm going to look at Acanthus Doctors, Silk Surgeons, and the build for the Necromancer as well, which is, I think I talked about a bit in the Lion God video, but we'll get into it with a few sample builds for Necromancers there. So that's the future of this series. Essentially, once that's all done, we'll be capping this series and going on to talking about the Showdown stuff. That's why I called this a limited series. But as and when new classes turn up, such as the Squire class is getting close to being a thing, then I'll revisit this and record more. But for now, that is it. And if you're out in the darkness and you are carrying your sickle and your bone pickaxe and your almanac and your whip, and you've got a rawhide headband and virtually nothing else on your survivor, know that you're still really valuable. You're providing a very important job, and you're facilitating and helping others in their happy hunting.